What do you do when your faith system no longer fits? Because sometimes you outgrow it. Sometimes you graduate, you ascend, you leave the old, itchy, worn-out way, and you begin to walk in the new. Sometimes you grow. Join the conversation with me, Tony Werfel, author, speaker, teaching pastor, as we help unwrap and rebuild a faith that no longer fits. We learn to walk into the new, messy journey called life. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This week, I'm recording from Grayling, Michigan, where I've been staying and just enjoying the fresh air, the green, lush trees, and family I haven't seen in over 10 years, it seems like. So it's beautiful. I'm recording here from my iPhone, so again, the recording may not be perfect, but it's still exciting to be able to talk. We decided as a family we're going to do this family camp at this same camp that my wife Danielle and I met over 20 years ago. So it's been so much fun watching my kiddos rock climb, wakeboard for the first time, run around barefoot through the woods. It's been fantastic. So all of this has been just really pretty beautiful. But I also wanted to share today that there's also been kind of a dark side to this visit. Even though it's been so beautiful to see family, friends, Michigan again, there has been a dark side, and I wanted to share a little bit of that with you. Because moving out west, I was able to leave some of the more conservative fundamentalist views of the East Coast, this kind of Dutch Reform place that I used to live in. So when I ended up coming back here, there's some things I've kind of been faced with again. And I wonder, for so many of you, has this ever happened to you before? You get what I'm saying? You come back home, you go back to that place again, you meet that person again who held certain views you may have kind of outgrown, and now you find yourself doing your best not to respond, not to get into that argument again. So you're doing your best to be accepting and loving and not engaging in that thing you now kind of find distasteful. And it's really hard sometimes. So while the camp has been inspiring and breathtaking natural beauty all around us, we had this speaker who would speak every morning and night. And for me, there were some triggers. And so this person definitely appealed to many people. But for me, he kind of reminded me of this kind of military kind of dad, bed made every morning, salute him as you stand at attention before meals begin, that kind of guy. And his way of approaching the Bible, it kind of followed suit. And he'd say things like, we need to all know that sin is sin, and don't be afraid to call it out as sin, and men are the head of the house, and we deserve respect, and women's place is there raising the kids, making dinner every night. It was safe to say my stomach, like some of yours, just from hearing that, it was turning a bit. But there was one phrase that he often would go back to over and over again. One I know you've heard before. He said things like this: the world is only getting worse. The world is going to hell in a handbasket. And if we're going to be honest, there have been some unsettling things happening. There's the Brexit, carnage in Syria, North Korea missile testing, terrorist attacks, the election of Donald Trump. It could seem pretty scary and even fit into that kind of ideology. The world's getting worse. And anyone growing up in a traditional home that's been told that the world has to burn before they're burn all the wicked away so they can go up into the sky and live in clouds, playing harps, living up there in their own special mansion, it's all too familiar with this idea of this loom and gloom that has to take place, this upcoming, end of the world kind of scenario. But let me ask you this. Is the world really getting worse? Is the world really going to hell in a handbasket? For them, their story to fit their understandings of being sinful and flawed, Jesus coming again on clouds, Revelation graphs fitting certain numerical codes, the world for them, it has to get worse. But what if the world is actually getting better? What if culture actually is improving? What would happen to their view of the Bible? What would happen to all their graphs and all of these things that they've kind of held on to? What kind of hope would they have if the world was getting better? Think about that. Let me share with you some interesting information I've found really fascinating, really compelling. Here's some statistics. Violence is actually decreasing according to the Uniform Crime Reporting Program, which I'll include below in the podcast description. So while the fear of violence is being perpetuated by our media, the actual violence in the world is decreasing. Here's another one. The proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty has actually fallen below 10% for the first time ever. Isn't that fascinating? Living standards globally are improving. More than 1 billion people have climbed out of extreme poverty since 1990, cutting the rate of poverty in half. Yeah. Global carbon emissions failed to rise for the 3rd year in a row. Is the world really getting worse? Here's another one. The death penalty has been ruled illegal in more than half of all countries in the world. Yeah. We're moving toward restorative justice, something Jesus promoted. Regardless of your feelings of our president, here in the U.S., and I know you have some opinions, there is good reason to become more optimistic about human freedom and the decline of authoritarianism and dictators in favor of democratically elected representatives. That's actually a positive thing if you look at it that way. Medical, technological discoveries, they're happening globally, and it's actually a really beautiful time to be living in with all of these new discoveries happening. I like this. Giant pandas, they've actually been removed from the endangered species list. Pretty cool. Child mortality cut in half since 1990. And another one, and again, there's tons of these statistics. I only picked 10. But 300,000 more people have basic electricity each day, which has changed the game for so many people and their standard of living. So let me ask you this. What if the truth was that our feelings that the world is getting worse is actually pretty irrational? Think of this one. Who profits more from the idea that the world's getting worse? Because I would argue it's definitely not society. That narrative that the world's only getting worse, it's only going to hell in a handbasket, that narrative, it's only going to lead to despair and more fear. So the only people I believe, and many others, who are actually profiting from the gloom and doom despair narrative, those are the powers that oppress people. So whether that means church, our current political system, you fill in the blank here. The only ones profiting over this narrative are the ones using it to gain power. So our political system, it does this with terrorism, war narratives overseas, economic woes that are spun out of control to control people, crying out for help, losing certain rights in order to be safe from an enemy that may or may not exist. So faith systems often parallel this. A church actually does well when it teaches its members they're evil because they, of course, who has the cure? They do. It's perfectly packaged. It's in nice, tidy formulas. Do this, accept this. They'll strike fear into you, and then they'll give you a cure. Yet, Jesus' teachings, if they're actually practiced, they would actually better the world. And here's the kicker for me. Jesus taught that this kingdom reality, it was to be experienced now. And yet we have 99% of his followers, and I just made that statistic up. It sure feels like 99% of them. Most of them today, I would argue, and I think there's a very good argument for it, they don't actually believe it. They don't live and function in the world as if his words and teachings were true. See, the Jewish rabbi, this Jesus, taught his first century audience that we can take care of the widow, the orphan, the stranger within our gates. And if we truly practice this, we'd have a totally different conversation when it came to health care and basic needs met for those who can't afford it. If we truly practice the path of nonviolence, We wouldn't need to engage in these discussions of bombing other countries or taking their oil, building the largest military force in the world. The truth is, most self-proclaimed Jesus followers don't actually follow in the steps of the Christ they profess. If they did, they wouldn't embrace the gloom and doom end of the world scenario so tightly. They wouldn't live in constant fear and trepidation and then making decisions based on those things. They wouldn't need the government to take certain rights away so that they could feel safe and free. They'd actually be living free. They wouldn't need a thing from the church or the government. So the cure wouldn't be these prepackaged lists of purpose-driven shack narratives. It would be simply learning to walk in the dust of the Jewish rabbi, whose simple teachings of enemy love, it changed the world. So how does one change this? How do we move from the gloom and doom narratives to more cheerful optimism? I would plead with you that to do this, we have to learn to open our eyes. So I had a really interesting experience while I was here at this camp and here in Michigan. During the week, I reconnected to someone I consider a mentor, even though I didn't really know him well. He's older than me, and he's a professional musician in the area. And growing up, I had a bunch of his CDs, which actually started as tapes. I'm kind of dating myself. I had tons of respect for this guy. And I remember when our band was first starting out, we had a chance to open for him. And before getting on the stage in front of all of this group of people that could easily have been hostile toward our pretty progressive music, he got up front and he started talking about change. He brought out this old yearbook and about how this new generation, they were creating music just like the past have done. And just like the past used passionate, powerful kind of music, he said, this new generation is doing the same. And he appealed that this group learned to embrace us like they wanted to be embraced. And so they learned to embrace the art we were creating. So essentially, he stood up for us, and I'll never forget it. So I saw him that week, and to my surprise, I was just shocked to see him. So I went up and I thanked him for that moment because I never had a chance to thank him. And as we talked, it was neat. Here I am talking to this guy, this person I used to just idolize. And so as we talked more, I voiced a couple annoyances about the speaker that week and about various programs and kind of the direction of where Christianity, fundamentalism is moving. And he in turn, he smiled at me. And he did the same. And then he says this. He says, sometimes you just need to stop, breathe, and let this place speak. Stop, breathe, let the world, the universe speak. Isn't that beautiful? Because here's the thing, I've been reading Exodus again, differently, not as a historical document, but looking for actual meaning for these ancient people. And Israel, they were in a place of pain and brokenness and oppression. And we're told in the story, they put slave masters over these Israelites. The Israelites became slaves, a labor force. And again, there's meaning here. And the story tells us that this group was literally, they're being forced into the mud and the dirt. They were forced down. And it says a lot about perspective, doesn't it? Oppressive forces, they force people down. Your whole perspective, it goes from looking up, being vibrant, alive, to looking down. And I would argue they do it with fear, violence, anger, certain narratives that are built through media. You're evil, you're sinful, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Down, down, down. And before you know it, you are a slave to this stuff. You become a really good slave. You learn to embrace the fear and the gloom and the doom. And so in the story in Exodus, we're told the Israelites, they lived in this. Yet there came a point when they began hearing a different kind of call. And the writers of what we call the New Testament, they put it this way. They said, when Israel was a child, it was loved, and out of Egypt was called a son. This was in Hebrews 11. So when they felt the call to something bigger, we're told there's a pause. They stop working. They Sabbath, according to the Hebrews. They stop and open their eyes to the reality that there's actually something far bigger going on than slavery. And they turn their eyes upward again. They open their eyes. And when they look up, they become aware of the goodness, the freedom there that's to be had. And it's right there waiting for them. They just had to stop long enough to become aware of it. And for me personally, I'm learning sometimes I have to stop. I have to put away the fear narratives. I have to turn off Fox television. Lord help me, turn it off. Maybe turn off the television altogether. Drop the graphs and the crazy timelines. Leave the formulaic religion that offers easy answers, partial cures for diseases they created. Just stop. Stop. And then when you stop, breathe again. Close your eyes. Focus on the life-sustaining air you have flowing through your body. The life and the freedom you have. It's actually a gift. Enjoy that for a moment. And then as you begin to breathe again, that's your opportunity to turn your eyes upward. Look up. See what's around you. Stop looking in the dirt. You may be surprised at what you'll find when the noise and the fear narratives, the gloom and the doom, when all of that's stripped away. What you might find is that the world is actually ripe with good. It's filled with wonder and awe. The world around you is actually really good. And the message of the Christ is really a simple invitation. And the invitation, it's this. Jesus says over and over and over again in his stories, in his parables, he says, join the banquet. Get out of the mud. Lift your eyes up. Celebrate the gift of the party. Live love fully and share it with those who need it most. Stop. Breathe. And allow the goodness that's all around you to speak. The world is actually not going to hell in a handbasket. And if you would stop, listen, breathe, and allow goodness to speak, I think you'd see it too. Blessings, everyone, and I can't wait to talk to you again next week. We're going to do something special next week with a couple friends. So anyways, take care, and talk to you next week. Bye.